And Giannis, to me, is a much better scorer than Paul George and Kyrie Irving because he can just get to the basket at will. Call it unskilled if you want. Say he has no bag if you want. As you say here, at the end of the day, 2 points is 2 points. Hello everybody, welcome to Also Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe and give us a like. It helps the video do much better in the algorithm, so it is much appreciated. Also, if you want to enjoy this as an audio-only experience, it is available over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's Hot Takes Tuesdays. You know what it is. We weren't able to do one last week because of scheduling conflicts, but we're gonna get into it now. From Big Slim 4, people don't know how to differentiate a player they like more and who's actually better. Like back in the day when people said Westbrook, Dame, or Kyrie were better than Steph, no, you just liked them more and they are getting more hate because of that. I do agree with your point about there being more hate going to a player because of their supporters, which is ironic and counterintuitive to what you think their goal would be. However, that said, I don't know if I would say that differentiating between favorite and best is something that a lot of people have an issue with. Maybe a lot of people don't recognize that bias there, but I think people understand. Like, for me, one of my 5 favorite players of all time is J.R. Smith. I don't think he's one of the best players of all time. That's an entirely different discussion. But I don't know. I'm sure there is a degree of truth to this, and some people don't realize that's what they're doing, but I think most people understand that there is a difference there. From Tired Basketball Fan, hot take, Magic Johnson is just as untraditional a point guard as Steph Curry, if not more. Every aspect of his game other than passing was more forward-like, and even his passing benefits from seeing others over the defense with height and length. Even more than that, the traditional equals averages a lot of assists is even more odd since barely anyone ever succeeded doing that, and those who did were built like big forwards. So what is a traditional point guard really? Someone small who never succeeds, someone built like a forward that averages a lot of assists? Maybe the best definition we have really is just whoever is listed as one. I don't disagree, and that was a point I made in the Steph Magic video, is like, yeah, Magic is technically more traditional point guard like, but we're not going to sit here and pretend like he is a traditional point guard. They wanted to play him at power forward earlier on in his career. They made him play shooting guard earlier on in his career because they didn't view him as a point guard. In fact, I believe the reason Magic went to the college that he went to was that the other one that was potentially on the table wouldn't let him play point guard. I still get the idea of the playmaker being what a point guard is, though, so that is a factor. The height advantage and what that meant for him is often understated, though. This is in response to one of my takes from Sariato, I think. I think using Giannis as a traditional big man is a huge waste of his talent. Giannis is at his best when he's at the three-point line barreling to the rim with 4 shooters around him. He won a championship that way while averaging 35 points in the finals. I understand where you're coming from, and I don't necessarily disagree that that is the best version of Giannis. However, I would rather have a slightly lesser version of Giannis, but Damian Lillard is dramatically elevated because of that. Like, as a whole, that trade-off is worth doing, and I think Giannis's barreling to the rim with shooters around him approach isn't really complimentary to Damian Lillard. Obviously, Dame is a shooter, but he needs to get into his off-the-dribble game a lot more often than he is. Yeah, I do think that he's better in that role, and you get 30 points on 60% shooting, and that's nice, but what's better for the team as a whole is not necessarily what's better for the most maximalized version of Giannis. OG and Jen Milosevic? No fucking way I got that right. Hot take, Tim Duncan has a really good argument to be the 3rd best player of all time behind Jordan and LeBron. His longevity is underrated. He is arguably the best defender ever and has a crazy amount of team success along with 2 MVPs. His ring in 2003 might be the most valuable, won almost as much as Magic and Kareem while having less help, and had better longevity than both Bird and Magic. His biggest downside is the lack of total stat count, but he sacrificed that for his team's betterment. P.S. His streak of never missing the playoffs and his win percentage might be some of the craziest records considering the Western Conference in the 2000s. Yeah, I do think if for both Duncan and Kobe, if you want to argue like for them being like the 3rd greatest player of all time, I would first and foremost mention that the 2000s Western Conference was fucking ridiculous. That's not always universally the case, but the West is not always great, especially in Magic and Kareem's era in the Lakers. I think that's fair. I got a lot of flack on my Kareem video where my only real take is that he's not bona fide, without a doubt, the third greatest player ever, not without a doubt top three. And I think you can put anyone from Tim Duncan to Hakeem Olajuwon to Larry Bird to Magic Johnson, Bill Russell. You can put really whoever you want at three, and I don't think it's that ridiculous. I think Tim Duncan's another great one. Tim Duncan is a player who I generally think it's underrated. He started to get more flowers recently, especially in the takes. From A6TY785U, hot take. While Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan are very comparable in terms of talent, I disagree that the Spurs would have been just as good with KG instead of Timmy. Timmy's auraless personality was the main thing that helped Greg Popovich's coaching style to flourish, while setting a foundation for other players and allowing continuity for the organization. KG's personality would clash with Pop as well as David Robinson. I get where you're coming from. I don't know that just because Kevin Garnett is a louder personality that automatically means that he's like going to clash with his teammates. I don't really think there's much report of KG being a bad confrontational teammate. I really don't think that's a problem for him. I don't agree to the extent you are saying. I wouldn't say auralist personality. I think it was more about the fact that he was without ego. Like, because he did not have a major ego, that allowed him to be told whatever from Greg Popovich, and that might be a little bit of something that comes into conflict. One way or the other, I do agree to an extent. I don't agree in whole. From Siekit So. Hot take, the whole discussion of having a deep bag is overrated. Having a deep bag doesn't necessarily mean scoring efficiently. People constantly glaze Paul George and Kyrie and call Giannis unskilled when Giannis has proven to be the better player multiple times, and the other two have only been efficient as second options. At the end of the day, 2 points is 2 points. Yeah, this is an argument I made in the Kevin Durant Hater Manifesto where I was like, look, having multiple different ways to score is good and overall better than having some limitations to your game. However, who scores the ball most efficiently is ultimately the equation that you should be arriving to for who the better scorer is. And Giannis, to me, is a much better scorer than Paul George and Kyrie Irving because he can just get to the basket at will. Call it unskilled if you want. Say he has no bag if you want. As you say here, at the end of the day, 2 points is 2 points. From 40 Nights, hot take. If Wilt Chamberlain was used properly, his efficiency would stand out to everyone to the same degree his volume does. Yes, Wilt in the 1967 seasons took far less field goal attempts than he did at any other stage of his career, other than years after. And that was thanks to Coach Alex Hannum telling him that he should do that more, and Wilt actually listening to him. He shot like 68%, which was by far the best field goal percentage in the league while averaging 24 points per game. I realize that 50 points per game is a crazy stat, but I think 24 points on 70% shooting is even crazier than that, given that there was a huge efficiency gap for the 50 point per game season, and his teams were worse and bad during his 50 point per game season and the adjacent high scoring seasons. So yeah, I think his volume is overrated and what he was capable of with less volume is underrated. So I agree 100%. From Omar Thrive, hot take, wait, so Jamal Crawford not playing well in the playoffs means he isn't, quote, all that good? Fair enough, but that means that when Joel Embiid and Harden weren't / aren't superstars in their primes, since all they do is choke in the playoffs, I'm not disagreeing with the narrative that Jamal isn't the GOAT six-man, but we need to be consistent here, similar to how Jason Tatum is a superstar since he, quote, led his team to the championship, despite not winning finals or Eastern Conference Finals MVP. That means that Joel / Harden aren't superstars since they've been unable to do that, whether it's cause of injury or any other excuses. Right? No, not right, because Joel Embiid and James Harden are so much better than Jamal Crawford. Like, this would make some sense if that was an even remotely reasonable comparison, but we are talking about a fucking role player versus two guys who are indeed superstars. Now, you can knock them and say they're not as good as they are in the regular season as superstar players, but like James Harden, let me look this up. If you look at his playoffs as a whole, his entire Houston run, just looking at the 85 games he played, 28 points per game, 7 assists. His three-point percentage and field goal percentage was not great. Got to the free throw line a shitload, though, so his efficiency as a whole was still probably pretty good. Let me see. 58% true shooting, which is better than league average at that stage of the NBA. That's very different. That's very different than putting up an extremely inefficient fucking 18. That's a very different thing. That's not comparable at all. From Guga, I think. Bubble hate is just retrospect. The hoops were amazing. The stories were interesting. No fans made it for a new experience on certain broadcasts where you could hear the players talking shit. Russ talking to babies in the bubble is hilarious. I agree with that. It's an interesting sect of NBA history, but I don't think the hate is just in retrospect. I think people were saying going into it. I remember this pretty clearly. People were like, yeah, well, this isn't going to count for anything. This is just such a dramatically different environment than what the playoffs are normally like. So I completely understand why someone would knock that. I don't. I personally don't subscribe to that. And I think the Lakers would have won the championship regardless. But also part of it is that the Lakers won. Let's be real. From 5-star, people overvalue how important finals losses are to a person's legacy. They treat it as if it shows that they can't perform in the finals or are chokers, when if they were chokers, they would most likely not have ever been to the finals. This is especially relevant when in the GOAT debate, where people bring up LeBron's 4-6 finals record as if that's a bad thing. The fact of the matter is that LeBron had 4 championships, and I don't think the finals losses should be a sore spot on his legacy, because making it to the finals is harder than getting bumped in the first or second round or whatever. In short, I believe you should compare the number of championships, not the record of the person's finals appearances. I do agree for the most part, and I think people who hold LeBron's finals record against him are just ignoring a lot of the context, but there are years in there where they could have won if LeBron played better, specifically obviously 2011 by far and away. There's some other things in there that could have been a little bit different, but pretty much every final series he lost only made sense to lose it, and the fact that is more of a strike than losing in an earlier round, it doesn't really make sense, and it seems counterintuitive. From PX Pappy, this is in response to a hot take reaction from the previous one, where I said Paul George is the best tall shooter of all time, like 6'8" or above. They mentioned Peja Stojakovic. Peja is definitely up there. Yeah, he spent a good amount of seasons where he was actually super high volume from 3. 5.7 3-point attempts on 40.8% shooting. Let's find his highest volume 3-point seasons when he gets up to 7 in Indiana this year, all the way to modern times. He is averaging 7.8 3-pointers a game on 39.2% shooting. Slightly better percentage, or actually a slightly worse percentage, but higher volume. So I would give it to Paul George, but I don't think Peja is a bad answer, and I think that one's fine. I believe I said, it wasn't close. It is close. Peja definitely has a strong case. So credit to you for that. From McDonald Chi, hot take, a guy that gets a lot of blocks for a team is nowhere near as important as someone who gets a lot of steals or someone that gets a lot of offensive rebounds. Yes, I don't think that level of impact is comparable, but a common take, there was someone in here, I don't know if it was on this video, someone was like, Dwight Howard is a super overrated defender because he would always spike the ball out of bounds. That is some major dork shit. I can't even imagine that being your perspective. Like, oh no, he blocked the shot too aggressively so they couldn't get the rebound. I get where that comes from, I guess. But what? Rim protection is very important. I think blocks can be overrated because they're not always the end-all be-all of rim protection, and there are players who can protect the rim better while averaging less blocks. Actually, a very common trend with all-time great defenders is their first couple of seasons, they average a comical amount of blocks, and then that number goes down as they take a more reserved approach. So for that reason, yeah, you're not wrong. Steals means possession. Offensive rebounds means extra possession. So as a whole, it's correct. Criticizing blocks as not actually good, though, is insane to me. From Please Stop Capping, hot take, Steve Kerr is an overrated head coach. His entire legacy hinges on the success that front office provided him. Don't believe me? Look at the performance of the Warriors the last 2 years. Team USA this year and last year, and the seasons when Curry and Klay were injured, or to a lesser degree when KD went down in the 2019 playoffs. What were those rosters, though? What was on those rosters when Steph and Klay were injured? Explain that to me, please. Also, the Warriors won, I believe the 2019 finals was a 6-game series, if I'm remembering correctly, and it was fairly competitive without Kevin Durant. I agree that Steve Kerr is actually an overrated head coach. He would not be on my head coach Mount Rushmore like a lot of people say he should be. However, I don't think him not winning without Curry and Klay is really any evidence of that. I don't think there's any coach that would have made that roster without those two players good. Do you know how ridiculous it is to be a good team when you have like $70 million worth of players not playing? The rest of the rotation is inherently just going to be some lesser players, and you can only do so much with that, especially in the West. So I'm just going to have to disagree with your reasoning, even though I agree with the take to some point. From Mies Bin, hot take, spacing sucks. What, just because someone can't shoot threes, we won't play him, even if he's an amazing all-around player? Fuck that. What? How many amazing all-around players who can't shoot are there? How many of them are there? And in the modern NBA, if you are truly an amazing all-around player, besides for three-point shooting, you do get to play. There is just a threshold, there is a level of that you have to reach to justify being a poor three-point shooter. Ja Morant and Giannis have no problem getting PT because they do other things so well. Like a role player who plays decent defense, rebounds the ball all right, and makes good passes, but is a complete zero on the three-point line, yeah, that player is not effective. If you're a role player and you're not a center and you cannot shoot the three, odds are you are not going to contribute enough with the other areas of the game to make up for the fact that you fuck up the spacing. You cannot like it all you want, but spacing is integral to offenses succeeding, and if you have shit spacing in the modern NBA, you will get burned for it. You can think it sucks, but it objectively is important, and again, if you're actually good enough to play without being able to shoot, then that shit that happens. I don't know what else to tell you. From Sankir Thakoshi, hot take, the concept of aura is the dumbest thing in the current generation, especially involving sports. It's even worse. Even people say player A is better than player B because he has more aura. Imagine saying one player has aura while even though his team barely managed to win a game in the Western Conference Finals, while the number one option on the championship team lacks aura. I assume we're talking about Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards there. Is anyone actually saying this player's better because of aura? I don't think I've heard that take, at least not commonly, and at least not sincerely. I don't think a lot of people are doing that. The word aura is just a new expression, but the concept of it, of just being a cool player, being a fucking, I guess, sexy player, the way that people talk about Anthony Edwards sometimes, like, that's just the way the game works. That's how people talk about the game. That's how it's always been. So I don't really know what to tell you. Dude has aura. That's just a thing. That's just a thing you acknowledge. I don't think it's deeper than that. From Jacob Watson, eye test is not an argument. You just like one's playing style better. Eye tests are just biased. That's silly because you can't not eye test. If you look at pure stats, that does not tell you the picture, and it's not just about liking a play style better. It's about thinking which play style is more effective for winning. That has, like, the eye test is not just which one of these players is aesthetically the most pleasing. It's like, which one of these players are your eyes showing you is impacting the game in ways that a box score can't always grasp. Sure, people can use the eye test for bullshit, like eye test Carmelo Anthony is a top 10 player of all time. I've heard some shit like that before. It's a factor, and eye test is just biased. Okay, if that's the case, then we can only ever talk about stats. And that's fucking ridiculous. That's at that point, you're just a box score watcher. From Jeremy Barthley, Paul George is not a better shooter than KD. This was me talking. This is in response, again, to the same thing with the Peja one. Yes, he is. He just is. Let's do the stats real quick. So remember, Paul George was shooting 7+ threes a game on nearly 40% in his peak seasons, basically as soon as his volume went up. So let's do the same thing for Kevin Durant. Here's his season where he shot 6 of them a game, up to now where the volume is essentially the same. Same percentage, basically, 2 less three-point attempts per game. So Paul George has higher volume while being just as efficient. That's the better three-point shooter. That's an area where I think you can just look at the stats, because volume and efficiency is really all you need to know to determine it. And like, I think they have a fairly similar, like, off the dribble versus catch and shoot difference. Obviously, not all three-pointers are created equal. 2013-14 to now, 66% of Kevin Durant's threes are assisted. 70% of his three-pointers are assisted. So it's a 4% difference. Higher volume, same percentage, better shooter. That's the end of it. For me. All right, this is going to be the last one. From Wailu, hot take. In the previous hot takes video, you talked about how it is harder for Luka to facilitate than it is for Jokic, as Jokic is a center. I vehemently disagree, as only a handful of centers have ever even been average facilitators, while guards and even large guards such as Magic, Oscar Penny, Jason Kidd, and you might even choose to include LeBron here as a de facto point guard, have been traditionally better facilitators. Jokic is already one of the best passers in history for any position, and point centers are now starting to get more popular because of him as a trendsetter. However, others are not really close to his level. I just can't see how you claim it is easier to be a point center than a point guard. That's not what my claim was. It's not easier to be a point center than a point guard, because Jokic is like an outlier level passer at the center position. There are no really other centers to compare him. I don't think at large it is easier to be a playmaker as a center than a point guard, but I think it's easier if you have Jokic and Luka level playmaking, because you don't have to dominate the ball as much. And the fact that Luka dribbles the ball the whole time, it makes facilitating more difficult, and it makes the decisions take longer. The heliocentric issue, that is the thing. That is the difference. Because Nikola Jokic can function so much off ball, because he can get the ball and then pass it almost immediately, and he makes those decisions super quick, and he doesn't have the burden of the ball handling responsibility, it makes it easier for him to play make. But that's only the case for Jokic. For centers in general, fuck no, it's not easier to be a good passing center than a good passer. But if you can get a center or a point guard and they're equally capable passers, the center is actually probably going to be the more functional playmaker. And that's why I think playmaking centers have been underrated throughout the past and have been underutilized throughout the past. Yeah, certainly it cannot be easier to be a point center than a point guard, but it is easier for Jokic than it is for Luka. So that was what my argument was. That was it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video, and goodbye.